Welcome to your last SLO practice preparation for your test. We are going to go over some questions together, and we're going to talk about how we should attack the questions and what we should be looking for. A lot of these passages are going to be familiar to you because we've already done them. However, we are going to analyze these answers one more time to get you ready and to help you in any way that can be possible to pass your SLO. So, one of our practice passages involves marsupials. So what we are going to do with this particular passage, just for the sake of time, we're going to skip through actually reading it. However, you should always read through your passages. But we're going to skip over that just for the sake of time and focus on how to attack the questions. So we're going to go ahead and look at number 1. It says, read the underlined section labeled 7. What we would do is go all the way up and look for 7. You're going to be looking at the whole entire sentence for 7. But it says there may be a mistake in punctuation, capitalization, or spelling. If you find a mistake, choose the answer that corrects the mistake. If there's no mistake, choose correct as it is. So it's asking us to look at 7. It says most marsupials have pouches that open at the top, but the bandicoot's pouch opens at the bottom. What you have here is a compound sentence. So you should think about where the comma goes in a compound sentence. You know it's a compound sentence because you have an independent clause, you have a coordinating conjunction, and you have another independent clause. For number 2, it tells you to read the passage underlined in 6. You're going to see that consists of this particular sentence. So we're going to have the same instructions. It says the meeting can be as short as 15 minutes. Most interviews usually last less than 2 hours. With this particular sentence, you see the merging of 2 independent clauses. However, you do not see any kind of coordinating conjunction that links it together. So you must need some kind of punctuation that is going to separate these 2 independent clauses. For number 3, it says read the passage underlined in 2. So I'll need to scroll up just a little bit more. And you're going to see it up here. And it asks us to look for any mistakes. So let's go ahead and look at 2. In 2, it starts here. And says, eventually the soil was completely lost when it blew out to the Atlantic Ocean. This is a complex sentence. The dependent clause comes at the end. So think about how grammatically it should look whenever you have your dependent clause at the end and your independent clause comes first. The next sentence asks you to look at number 6. So we're going to start here with 6. It says, for 6, after the land had been stripped of its natural vegetation, the ecological balance of the plains was destroyed, leaving nothing to hold the soil when the rains dried up and the winds came in the 1930s. You have a complex sentence again with the dependent clause coming at the end. So think about how it should look with punctuation or not if your dependent clause comes at the end. Next, you have a passage about Air Force One. It's telling you to look at sentence 2. It is this entire sentence. While these planes are only referred to as Air Force One while the president is on board, the term is commonly used to describe either of the 2 aircraft normally used and maintained by the U.S. Air Force solely for the president. So whenever you're looking at number 2, you need to consider in this complex sentence where your dependent clause comes. So where the dependent clause ends, you typically have a certain type of punctuation, and then you begin the independent clause. So select that for your answers. And then in your next one, you have the example passage to look at right here. It says lack of wireless telecommunications and quick transportation made long distance travel impractical because it took up much time and isolated the president from events in Washington, D.C. So you need to look at where the dependent clause comes and think about the punctuation that is needed and see if there's any punctuation that breaks up the sentence. With Jackie Robinson, it says to look at number 3, what's underlined with 3. And in number 3, you see right here, he attended the University of California, Los Angeles. At the University of California, Los Angeles, he was a star player of football, basketball, track, and baseball. There, he was the first athlete in UCLA history to letter in 4 different sports. What you need to think about is how many independent clauses you are looking at with these sentences and how they are supposed to be separated. So when you look at the answer choices, consider where the independent clauses end. And then number 8 asks you to look at what's underlined in 5. So with 5, it says, after leaving UCLA his senior year, Robinson enlisted in the Army during World War II. What you need to consider is how you need to separate the independent clause from the dependent clause. So you need to consider where the independent clause comes in the sentence and to see what punctuation that you need to separate the dependent clause from the independent clause. All right, in keeping care of big cats, you have this example passage. It says, the milk given to cats is different than the milk given to human children in a number of ways. What you need to look at with this particular sentence is which one actually makes the complete sentence. With your next one, you are looking at the passage marked with 25, and it says, a decision is made by the zoo staff that a certain cat is in too much pain. Let me end it. There you go. A decision is made by the zoo staff that a certain cat is in too much pain to have a good life, when the life of the cat is humanely ended. So what you need to do to look at this particular one, look at how this sentence should be arranged. You need to consider the clauses, if they're subordinate clauses or if it's the main clause. You need to determine which order this makes the most sense when it comes in. So consider your dependent clauses and how it affects your main independent clause. How does it make the most sense? For fingerprints, you're looking at sentences 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and highlight them. It's asking you if you need to rewrite it in any way to where it makes more sense. So are any of them joined by coordinating conjunctions? Does a comma go in any certain way? Consider that. And then for number 12, as you look at sentence 7, you're going to go here for 7. Do you need to combine sentence 7 with anything so it makes sense? Do you need to leave it as it is? Should it be taken out of the passage? How is it most effective? You have a passage about the Peachtree Road Race. So we're looking at sentences 4 and 5. It says the race modestly began in 1970 with only 110 people. It says this revision of sentences 4 and 5 in the paragraph kind of combines both of them together. And it says which best describes this type of sentence, or which sentence type best describes this revision. So you look at the sentence. The race began modestly in 1970 with only 110 people in the race. Look at your number of subjects and your number of verbs. Once you take a look at that, you'll be able to figure out what type of sentence that it is. For 14, you are simply trying to find the compound sentence. So in a compound sentence, you are going to look for two independent clauses. You're going to consider how they are united. So the first thing you need to do is to look for two sets of subjects and verbs together, and then consider the conjunctions that surround them, if any. For 15, you're trying to find the simple sentence. You need to look for one independent clause that can stand alone and only one subject and verb together. For 17, you're looking for a simple sentence where you only have one subject and one verb together, and it communicates an independent thought that can stand alone. For 18, you're looking for a complex sentence. You need to look for a dependent clause, which can be signaled by a subordinating conjunction. Then you need to look for an independent clause. Sometimes they come at the beginning. The dependent clauses sometimes come at the beginning with a comma, or the dependent clause comes after the independent clause where there is no comma. For 19, you have a compound complex sentence, which means you are going to look for at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. For 20, again, you're only going to find one subject and one verb, and it can stand alone. For 21, a complex sentence has one dependent clause and one independent clause, so you need to look for the subordinating conjunctions. 22, it is a combination of at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause to create a compound complex sentence. The same for 23. For sentences like 24, you first need to find a compound sentence, which means you need to look for two independent clauses, and then you need to look for the comma that comes before the coordinating conjunction or the fanboy. Your comma is always going to follow your first independent clause if it is joined by the coordinating conjunctions. In 25, you need to remember the rule that if it goes dependent clause, then you're going to have a comma before you get to your independent clause. And if it follows the other rule and you have your independent clause first, there will be no comma between the independent clause and the dependent clause. In 26, you need to look for two independent clauses. In this instance, their comma will follow your first independent clause, and then it will be joined by a coordinating conjunction. You look for, first look for the simple sentences, only one subject, only one predicate. And then you can look for keywords such as coordinating conjunctions or fanboys. And if you see one of the fanboys, just know that it has to have a subject and verb that follows it for it to be a coordinating conjunction in that instance that is joining together more than one independent clause. For 28, you're finding the sentence that is not a compound sentence. So the two ways that you get compounds are with independent clauses joined either by a semicolon or fanboys. 20